I was the lone survivor. They ambushed us during a scouting mission. Their starships encircled us and tore apart our engines with their particle weapons. Most of my marine brothers were vaporized before our vessel crash-landed. Somehow, I clung to life, but unfortunately, freedom eluded me. When I awoke, I was bound and shackled, being prodded by the electronic devices of these Tau marauders. They muttered in their wretched language as they forced me forward. One of them, however, knew how to speak Low Gothic. "You will become an asset for the greater good." The leader smiled. He was taller than the rest, his regal authority evident from the detail of his armor, stance of his demeanor, and the reverence the other showed instantly when he spoke. "And you will become a fly-ridden corpse when the Imperium gets to you." I spat back. There was no reply, only armored legs assailing my ribs. The eyes of the leader narrowed, and he pointed to his vessel. My captors nodded and dragged my now limp body to his vessel. His ship was large and pristine looking. As we approached, the hatch opened almost expectantly. Dark, cool vapor blasted past me. The strength of my captors' grips seemed to tighten as they inhaled it. They continued to drag me further into the vessel. Corridors opened and buttons flashed as we approached, seemingly in response to my presence. A sickening thought entered my mind as I realized the vessel was empty before we boarded. Was there an AI component to the behavior of the ship? Or were their sensors more elaborate than the Imperium had surmised? I'll never know for sure, but I do know this. Even AI wouldn't save them from the Emperor's wrath. With a thud, I was thrown into my cell. The captors continued muttering in their language. For several minutes I sat alone, in dimly lit incarceration, until the leader walked into view. His face was expressionless, but his hand's grip on the needle was sinister. Within its grasp, the syringe glinted menacingly from the ambient light and shadows. "You will divulge what I wish to know, what the greater good wishes to know, whether you want to or not," the leader said calmly. I stumbled to my feet, too ready for a final confrontation, when his other hand quickly snatched a device from his belt. Before I could curl my fingers into a fist, the rays of light drilled into me. There was no physical damage, that I could comprehend anyway, but my nerves exploded in an agony I can only compare to being torn apart by the warp. As I lay there, shaking in exhilaration and agony, he opened up the cell and impaled my leg. The detestable fluid began seeping into my bloodstream. My mind lost track of the reality around me, as I began to question my five senses and my history. As the colors blended and the smells intermingled, the sensory overload was astounding, until finally my consciousness snapped. Later, I awoke. I assume I had been out for several hours, as I was once again immobilized by bindings, and in another vessel. "What is going on?" I screamed, but the Tau looked at me puzzled. None of them know Low Gothic, I thought to myself, frustrated. I looked through the window of our vessel. We were traveling quickly through space. I didn't know what I had been asked during my interrogation, even less what I was forced to divulge. Regardless, I had an ominous premonition that what I had told them had to do with where we were going. Cannon fire erupted my thoughts as our vessel shook viciously. The Tau began shouting to each other as orcish ships swarmed across the vision of the window. Lasers began sailing from our vessel and the vessels behind us as an all-out brawl commenced in this quadrant of space. My heart dropped as a loud noise all but ruptured my eardrums, and we began sailing through space, until finally getting sucked into the gravity of a nearby planet and sailed downward. Trauma filled me as I relived my first shipwreck. The Tau continued to shout frantically as they attempted to mend the broken damage of the ship, but to no avail. As we twirled to the surface of this planet's crust, I accepted my fate. If I were to die, it would be with the Emperor's praise on my lips. Long live the I was cut short from my chant when a burst of tearing energy cycled through me. I felt as I did within the Tau jail cell. My senses becoming muddled and confused, but this was far more visceral. As the pain agitated my consciousness, I felt a temptation. A temptation to think of what I hated most, what I wanted to suffer, what I wanted to blot from existence. I thought of my Tau captors and their leader. As my body shook and convulsed, I attempted to open my eyes, but I could not. The pain was all-consuming. There was a loud crash as our damaged ship made contact with the planet. I was conscious for it, but only barely. The inexplicable desire to think of those Tau suffering, seemingly the only aspect of my existence, keeping me awake. I expected to hear more frantic shouting from the Tau, but my surroundings were near silent, aside from the low hum of the few technological functions of the ship that had survived our orcish ordeal. After a few minutes, I managed to open my eyes. The pain in my mind's eye was splintering, and my vision was distorted, but in the corner of my eyes I could make out the carnage. All the Tau were dead, but not from the crash. Their bodies were split in half, vertically. There was no blood. Somehow, some way, they were severed cleanly. I stood up in shock as I noticed my bindings were also gone. A surgical line cut through their center to allow me an easy escape from them. Who could do this? The orcs? They don't have that technology. Did the ship malfunction and harm them? But why not me? I began to mutter to myself. There was another loud crash, and I cradled my eardrums as I dropped to my knees. The noise was blistering due to the current headache I was fending off. After a few moments, I stood back up, tilting my head to view the ship through the corner of my eyes, and I noticed it was the leadership. The hatch of the vessel opened, and a few of his soldiers began filing out. I hate them as well. I stammered with a sudden compulsion that overrode my will. As I did, they slowed, their bodies twitching in their stances until, in a violent flash, they were severed vertically. What? I roared as I watched their bodies tumble. This was madness, utter madness. This was all my doing? I thought in disbelief as I walked toward the vessel. I began following the same path within it as I had taken as a prisoner. On my journey, thoughts began creeping into my mind. I'm no psyker. I've never been a psyker. But I can't explain what just happened. Is this power really mine? If it is, this changes things. I don't need the Emperor's blessing. I have power of my own. No! I roared, attempting to push out the heresy, but I couldn't. As I got closer and closer to the jail cell I had been placed in, my mind whirled in fantasy. The conquest, the glory, the loot. As my machinations deepened, I noticed the pain in my skull lessening. No, I can't. The Emperor is the greatest good, I said, pounding against the walls of the hallway. I panted vigorously as I frantically thought of ways to shunt these sudden desires, when I noticed the driver's seat. Rushing forward, I found the captain sitting next to the pilot, both having endured the same grisly fate of the other Tau. There could be no doubt, I had been the cause. I looked around the controls of the ship. They seemed familiar. As I brushed my hands across them, a sensation of memory swept through me as I operated them. It was second-hand nature to me. I had the ship airborne and the shields raised. I was about to hit the thrusters when another thought slithered into my mind's eye. I could own this entire segment of the galaxy. The thought was delicious to me, but I knew it wasn't my own. Frantically, I fired up the communications of the ship. As I wrestled against the new desires of my splintering consciousness, I recounted this tale. If you are hearing this, know that I am from the Bloodied Saber chapter. My last conscious thought, as a servant of the Empire, was likely made near a battle between the Orcs and Tau. If you venture near here, bring every ounce of might you have, including psychers, and pray, by the Emperor's goodwill, that you are not split in two. For I will shatter you for the glory of Khorne, the Gil of Nurgle, and the delight of Slaanesh. Down with the Emperor!
Hey, we'd like to thank Kayvon K for sending us photos of his incredible army. And if you'd like to send us your army, just click in the links below.